Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast, my Patreon supporters! Thank you so much for supporting the show. Seriously. So, I thought we could start each episode now, or end each episode, I suppose, with kind of a video bonus recap kind of thing. Because you guys are giving me money to make my podcast, and I feel like you deserve a lot of extra content. Now, number one, secret most people don't know, I record the show totally in a robe that I didn't just buy last week. I definitely have been doing this the whole time. Just so you know. This is where we actually record the podcast, right here in our guest bedroom, I suppose, with all of our weird animal things on the wall, including the weirdest animal of all. This is Chippy, the Mad Scientist Podcast cat, who's very nice and good. Say hi to the fans, Chippy. Hi to the fans. She hates this. Alright. This week's episode is on vampires, which is a topic that I've wanted to cover on the show for a long time, but which Vampires are a hard one because in a lot of people's minds, I think nowadays, they're kind of not as cool as some other topics. So, for example, like, why would you do vampires when you could do a really good alien case or, Bigfoot or something else that's kind of, I think people tend to think of as having more legitimacy than vampires. But honestly, the story of vampires is kind of the quintessential monster story. It starts off with this legend that is sort of linked to religious belief, and it's used over time to kind of promote racist and dangerous ideas almost, in the sense that it's used to give a baseline for why you should distrust another person, a foreigner, coming to your town or village, right? The idea of someone like Count Dracula coming in with all this money and just, weaving their way into your household it may not seem that dangerous to us now, but imagine imagine being in a 16th century village in the middle of Romania, and all of a sudden a nobleman comes out of nowhere and is like, well, I own you now. You're my peasants. And since I don't own all the land you work, you're going to work for me. And so in many ways, it was a parasitic relationship, which is kind of quite interesting, I think. And so in doing the research for this episode, it's one of those ones where we all think we know the story of the vampire. We all heard of Count Dracula and how that's linked to Vlad the Impaler, and we think we know all these things about it. And we do know that. It's still part of our social consciousness, but I hope and I think that this episode has a lot to bring outside of just that normal stuff you might have already heard. So I hope you really like this episode. I hope you enjoy these bonus little snippet things that I'm going to try to do. And hopefully this will lead into me actually doing like experiments on camera and showing you some cool science stuff. So I'm working on like figuring out a good way to show me writing out equations or things like that so we can do stuff like calculus, which I've been dying to do an episode on, but will not work without something for me to be like, look at this math that's going on. It just will not work with a verbal-only medium. So, anyways, thank you again for listening and for supporting the show, and I will be back very shortly with another one of these.